thought it would be really interesting to contrast. Sometimes we're told, oh, that works in the US and those big farms, but, in Europe or in Asia, we can't do that. So we thought it would be important to perhaps get a European vision of the same topic. And we're very fortunate to have Dr. Kristian Havn present the European vision. And let me introduce you to Kristian. He's a veterinarian, but before that, he was a farmer, and I think many of us vets wanted to be farmers before we became vets. He was also a helicopter pilot, and since 2002 has been a veterinarian. He graduated from the University of Copenhagen. He has a certificate in pig health management, and he's been working as a specialist pig vet for over 18 years. And he's now a co-owner of the PRRS swine practice in Denmark. This is a large 21-person vet practice specialized in swine, with many clients in Denmark and all over the world. Unfortunately, Kristian is having problems with video, so we only have audio for Kristian today. But I'm sure the content is enough for our audience. So, Kristian, welcome. And Kristian will be sharing with us practical approaches to gilt acclimatization with a European perspective. Kristian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I have a technical problem with my camera, so I just hope that everybody enjoys my picture just a second or two, and then I'll lead on. And thank you very much for the warm welcome. You said most of it. Our office is in the mid part of Denmark, and as you mentioned, we are serving somewhat a little more than 1,200 farms in Denmark. Except from this year, as everybody know, we had a big issue with this pandemic coronavirus, so we can't travel that much, but normally we are also consulting quite many farms abroad, mostly Eastern Europe, but also Asia and South America and different countries in Europe, of course. The red arrow is showing where I'm sitting right now. This is my home, pretty close to the German border. This is a very pig-dense area where I spend most of my time with my clients. Well, Dr. Clayton mentioned a lot of really, really good things, also why gilts needs an acclimatization period, and as he stated, the main goal is, of course, to have gilts best possible prepared to optimal reproduction. We also want the sows to be strong to ensure a high durability, and thereby trying to ensure a low sow mortality. It's a very costful thing to have a high sow mortality for the farmers, and it also drags a lot of political attention. And this raising the gilts is the way that we do it is really important to keep the sow mortality as low as possible. We also want the gilts to be properly immunized in order to avoid, first of all, reproductive diseases and thereby also securing less vertical transmission to the offspring, the piglets, and later on, of course, the time of weaning, spread of certain virus diseases like PRRS virus and influenza and other diseases among not only the weaners but also later on in the finisher barns. The gilt acclimatization period also has to be long enough. The animals have to be isolated long enough to avoid shedding of post-immunization pathogens. And obviously, we are thinking mostly of the PRRS virus, but also especially swine influenza and mycoplasma, as stated earlier by Dr. Clayton. When I look upon this topic, gilt introduction, to me, it contains a lot of different subtopics if you want to be successful in this gilt introduction procedure. I normally consider this to be a very practical thing, but as a consultant, we need to take many things into consideration. This is pretty much the slide showing things that I consider the most important, and I'll briefly try to cover most of it, except from the last three to the right: AI service and electronic sow feeding training and socialization, simply because we don't have the time for that today. But the first of them, I'll try to cover them briefly. Let's start with the genetics. When we are designing these programs, we also, with our farmers, we have to consider what kind of genetics we should run in our gilt quarantines. Traditionally in Denmark, for the last many decades, we have more or less 100% based our new breedings on Dan-bred animals, Yorkshire landrace combinations 50-50. But we have seen the last year or two, especially, that the Topic North swine TN70 genetics are increasing their market shares, and we are very happy to not only to see the competition to the Dan-bred system, but also to see what is the differences in the performance of these two genetic lines. So that's going to be great fun for all of us. We also have to consider whether we should produce our gilts home on the sow farm, or we should rely on animals bought in from multiplier farms. There are obviously pros and cons to both. It is for sure cheaper to produce the gilts on farm. You could also have a veterinary argument. It is probably also more safe. We can manage diseases in a more safe way. On the other hand, over time we might lose genetic power, and that is primarily why we would like to buy in the animals. Let's take a look at the replacement rate. This issue here, or this topic, is more or less a measurement of capacity because it takes up space to run these gilt development units and quarantine stables, and this is just a matter of space and square meters. The normal way to do it in Denmark when we do these calculations is that we calculate a replacement rate of 50%, which means that for every 1,000 sow heads, we want to raise somewhat 500 gilts or inseminate 500 gilts per year. That means that 18 to 22% of each batch of inseminations needs to be gilt. And that means, again, that we have to inseminate roughly 10 gilts every week for every 1,000 sow heads on the sow unit. I also try to look into the barn and pen quality. I consider that to be extremely important if you want to raise high quality gilts. This drawing here is showing my favorite pen for the gilts, and what is different here compared to, for instance, finisher pens, is that I like to have quite a lot of solid floor in the boxes or in the pens, and the main reason for that is that we need solid floor to shapen the hooves of the gilts in a natural way, and to prevent many of these hoof damages that we see that are related to raising gilts on slattered floors. In the real world, it looks like this. Of course, all this solid floor gives us a challenge of keeping the area of solid floor dry, especially in the summertime when temperature goes up. Then the animals normally likes to defecate and urinate in the concrete floor and sleep on the slattered floors. One way to control that very efficiently is to run floor feeding systems. As you can see on the picture, we have a floor feeding line hanging under the roof. I prefer to have two lines actually, so that we are spreading the dry feed more or less all over the concrete floor. That helps us a lot to keep the floors dry because they're not defecating where they have to eat. But it also ensures that every animal has enough eating space, and that helps us to have a unified growth on all animals, and less fighting, by the way. But this way of doing it is quite nice. When it comes to space, we prefer to give them a lot of space. The gilts almost twice as much as we normally provide for finisher pigs. That means 50 to 110 kilo, around 1 square meter. And when they are bigger, just pre-service, 1.5 up to 2 square meters per gilt. Again, that gives us less fighting. As you probably all know, the LY breedings or combinations are, I wouldn't say aggressive, but they are quite active animals, and giving them quite a lot of space prevents tail biting issues and fighting. If we take a look at the feeding, which is extremely important to do in the right way, this slide here, the idea with this slide is not that you have to memorize all figures, but you can see in the right side of the slide, I have a blue line. So on the left side, we have a 3-phase restricted feeding strategy with three feedstuffs that we are using, and over time we are decreasing amount of crude protein, and we also lower the amino acid levels to ensure that the animals, when they grow bigger, they have less lean meat and more back fat. Unfortunately, this system with 3 phases are not always possible, simply because of lack of silo capacity. Many of our gilt quarantines does only hold 1 silo, and that forces us to shift strategy to the one that we have right of the blue line, which is the single diet strategy. It is more or less designed as the one that we do use for dry sows. But as you can see on the amino acid level and the crude protein level, we might expect that these animals are growing too much meat and too little back fat. The 5.2 in crude in digestible lysine is the official Danish recommendation. But if I'm designing the feedings, I actually prefer an even lower amino acid level down to 4.2, so that they don't grow too much meat and get too big. That leads on to the next thing that I normally focus a lot on, which is the body condition at the time of the first service, or back fat level. We use a lot these lean meters or back fat scanners to control our feeding programs. This is as you can see in the right corner, a quite old study, but this is from Holland. Our Dutch colleagues, they did over the last decade or two a tremendous work on studying the effect of back fat level at the time of service. So even though that this study is quite old, it is still 100% the truth, in my opinion. As you can see, the data is quite big, 15,000 sows. And if you look at the back fat level, you can see that the lower the back fat level is at the time of the first service, or around 110 kilo, the higher the risk is that the sows are culled from the sow farm before fourth parity. So this means a lot if you want to have sows with a high durability on the farm, that they have developed a nice back fat layer at the time of first service. This is another survey done by Provimi Research in Holland, and here we can see the effect of back fat at first service, at first liter on born piglets, total born, live born, and total weight on the live born. And even though this is also an old service, and the level in Denmark are quite high, 17, 18 live born in first liter is not uncommon. you can still see the trend that if they have the right back fat level at the time of first service, you can also have a better farrowing result. As everybody knows, the inside is sometimes more important than the outside. I'm sure that if I was supposed to evaluate the back fat level of these two animals, I would probably consider the one to the right being fat and the one to the left being skinny. So this is just an example of why we are using these lean meters a lot to evaluate our feeding programs. We simply just don't trust our eyes to do the job. So these are my targets for the gilts. I wanted them to grow fairly slow, which is around 800 gram of every daily weight gain. I also want them to be 14 to 16 millimeters of back fat at the time of the first service. Like Clayton stated earlier, around 135 kilos of body weight. We recommend never to inseminate in first heat, second, third, fourth heat. That is all okay, but we have a dramatic drop in live borns if we inseminate them in the first heat. And then an age of roughly 33 to 36 weeks of age. As you can see on the two top lines, these 800 gram of every daily weight gain plus 14 to 16 millimeters of back fat holds a big conflict, because the animals are genetically capable of growing minimum 1,000 gram per day. 1,200 gram is not unusual if we feed them right. But if we want to grow them this slow to ensure that they can develop the supportive tissues, the tendons, the joints and so forth, then they need to grow slow. So how do we make sure that they grow this slow, but at the same time have enough fat on the back to ensure a good reproduction result? Well, we feed them rich on fibers to ensure a good development of the GI tract. We feed them low on protein at least at the end, and a low amino acid level as stated earlier. But we try to feed them on very high energy level the last 2 to 4 weeks pre-service. One of the ways that I do it is what you can see on the picture to the left. It is actually candy for humans. We buy 500 or 1,000 kilos of candy in bags, like you can see on the picture. And the last 2 to 4 weeks pre-service, we feed the gilts 200 up to 400 gram of candy per gilt per day. And that actually ensures a nice back fat layer on the time of service. If we take a look at the immunization of the gilts, as everybody knows, it's all about finding the right balance between the pathogens or the infections that are present in the sow herd and trying to give some kind of immunity towards these pathogens in the gilts prior to introduction. So what determines the length of the acclimatization period? Well, as it was stated earlier, it must be long enough to allow the animals to develop an adequate immune response and produce the necessary antibodies. That is quite clear. But we also want to have a period long enough to make sure that we can seize any virus shedding before they are entering the sow herd. And again, our main focus here is flu, influenza virus, and PRRS virus, and to some extent also, as stated by Dr. Clayton, mycoplasma. So the length of the cool down period is therefore dependent on virus persistence in infected animals. So gilts should not meet any unexpected infections before introduction to sows to avoid introduction of pathogens to sows or their offspring. That is quite clear. That can really gives us a lot of trouble. I must say, this is my personal opinion. I don't trust natural immunization very much. When I was a young vet, 15, 20 years ago, we did it a lot in the old days, moving back, let's say, slaughter sows or even gilts, like suggested by Dr. Clayton, relying on them to spread whatever diseases they had to the gilts. But we were not very successful. And I think one of the issues at that time was that the old generation of veterinarians in Denmark, they were really scared about using the modified live PRRS vaccines. So they relied on the older animals from the sow farm to spread the virus among the gilts. And sometimes we succeeded and sometimes we didn't. So it would be, in my opinion, it was based on luck. So I never run natural immunization. But if the gilts are housed in continuous flow systems before entering the sow herd, they can carry PRRS virus or swine influenza virus directly from recently placed animals into the sow breeding unit. That means that if we keep them in a quarantine room for, let's say, 8 or 10 or 12 weeks, and some of these animals maybe are just infected 2 or 3 weeks prior to introduction to the sow herd, we are for sure spreading these diseases when they are entering the breeding unit. So I don't rely on these systems very much. That is why I recommend always to introduce gilts from quarantine rooms. That also goes with own production of gilts. And we need to have no contact from these animals to the sows before they are tested safe. I'm pretty sure that a lot of you have heard about the single 12-week quarantine stable system, but I'm gonna tell about how I do it anyway, because I think this is one of the strongest tools that the pig veterinarians can have in their toolbox when we are talking about controlling especially virus diseases in sow herds. So the whole idea is that we have a compartment. In this textbook example, I have 10 gilts in every age group from 11 to 22 weeks of age. And as I said earlier, 10 gilts per week means 1,000 sows. So this would be a single 12-week gilt quarantine that fits to a 1,000 sow head farm. The point is that we fill up this quarantine stable at the same time with these animals. The age spread is from 11 weeks from the youngest up to 22 weeks of age for the oldest. Then we close this compartment for another 12 weeks, for the next 12 weeks. And basically the first thing we do after closing the door is that we whole herd vaccinate, if we can call this a herd. We whole herd vaccinate the whole quarantine stable with these 120 animals with MLV vaccine, PRRS virus, and of course only if we have a PRRS virus issue on the sow farm. After that, we have, you could say, a more normal vaccination program, and I'll get back to that later. After 12 weeks, all gilts can be moved to the sow side. And the compartment is washed, cleaned, disinfected, dried out, and is ready for a new batch. One of the problems with this single 12-week quarantine system is that not many sow farms have the capacity in the sow herd to introduce, in this case, 120 animals at the same time. They simply don't have the space. So the most often way to deal with this problem is that we run a double 12-week quarantine, which is pretty much the same idea from a veterinary perspective. So the first points to the right here are exactly the same as in the the single 12-week quarantine. But the difference here is that after these 12 weeks where the gilts are ready to be introduced to the sow farm, we can just move 10 gilts at a time. So if they don't have the space, the capacity inside the sow herd, they can just empty 10 gilts every week and inseminate them. And after the 12 weeks where this compartment is empty, the next stable is ready. This is how it looks in principle. Quarantine 1, quarantine 2 can be filled up from an external supplier and from there moved into the sow herd after 12 weeks, one by one. But it exactly the same system we are trying to run if we have an internal gilt supply system. So here comes the question: what would you consider to be the 3 most important reasons why all gilts must be held in a quarantine for a period of 3 months before introduced to the sow herd? 1, to minimize the risk of introduction of new diseases like reinfection to the sow herd. 2, to ensure adequate immune response in gilts prior to introduction to the sow herd, or to cease any viral spreading among gilts before introduction to the sow herd, or of course, all above. I totally agree with most of you, I can tell. I would also consider all above answer number 4 to be the most correct. So thank you very, very much for participating here. Well, let's take a look at the vaccination programs that I normally recommend on my farms. I've tried to divide it up in a standard program and a design program because this program here is pretty much what I recommend all our farms to run. No matter the health status on the farm or anything else. We try to vaccinate them twice with Haemophilus parrrsuis, erysipelas twice, parvovirus twice, and swine influenza virus twice. We have 2 different vaccines in Denmark. The one is for the most common 3 types of flu virus. And then we have a specific one for the one H1N1 that we call pandemic influenza. So that depends pretty much on the pathogens that we have earlier isolated in the sow farm. And then 1 single shot with PCV2 vaccine. On top of that standard program, I run design programs that are very much designed according to the specific health situation on the sow farm. PRRS virus, we have discussed that today. We are always using MLV vaccines. They are very, very strong, good, and also reliable vaccines. You just need to know how to handle them. But they gives us a very strong immunity. I might also vaccinate the 3rd time with Haemophilus parrrsuis if needed. The 2nd time with PCV2, even though we use 1-shot vaccines to improve immunity against PCV2 virus, leptospirosis, mycoplasma, different Clostridium species, APP. It is in Denmark mostly type 2 and type 6 that are causing us problems. And of course also Lawsonia intracellularis and etc. But these programs are very much designed, and I don't think I have 2 different sow farms where I'm actually running the same program. This is the program that it could, the way it could look when I give it to the farmer. It is written in Danish, I know, but the point is not to read it, but just to see how I deliver it. To the left, we have all the brand names of the vaccines that we are using on the farm. In the top, we have weeks after the compartment is filled up, and also the diseases that we vaccinate against and the dosage of the vaccine that we are using. And in that way, I can be fairly sure that these typically young workers that are running the vaccination programs in the Gilt quarantines, that I try to make it as easy as possible for them to follow my instructions here. Thank you very much for your attention.